Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Jody Patterson, Director of Client Development for Oasis Solutions. Thank you so much for joining the webinar this afternoon, where we are going to be presenting managing your fixed assets from acquisition through disposal utilizing Sage Fixed Assets. Our speakers today are myself, Jody Patterson. I'm going to be managing the Q&A portion towards the end of the presentation. Your presenter is Wayne Austin, Sales Engineer with Sage Software. Our agenda for today is, first, we're going to demonstrate the value of using a fixed asset software such as Sage Fixed Assets, the financial impact of ghost assets on your organization, the different fixed assets modules, because it is a modular system, some tax law changes and how it gets updated within the system, and then we're going to dive into the solution demonstration and follow up with Q&A. Some housekeeping before we get started. Everyone will be remaining on mute throughout the webinar, but we definitely want your questions, so please pop those into the Q&A window as we go through the demonstration. We will cover those at the end. The presentation and recording will, the presentation will be recorded today, and a recording will be sent out to attendees after the demonstration. So you don't have to take serious notes as we go along, because we will follow up with that recording. A little bit about Oasis Solutions for those who may not already be a client of ours. We were founded in 1991, so we do have 30 years of experience working in the Sage environment. The practice was founded based on Sage 100, which is the core solution that the majority of the attendees are operating on today. We have been voted the best places to work in both Kentucky and the Louisville metro area for the last 4 years in a row, and we need to update our slide so it reflects that, as well as as well as received the incredible awards numerous times in the Louisville area for fast growth companies. And we have been named to Bob Scott's top 100 VARs for the past 3 years in a row. That slide also needs to be updated, because I do believe that we are current with on that list for 2021 as well. Currently, we have over 500 clients in 36 states, although we are regionally based in the Louisville metro area in Louisville, Kentucky. But it doesn't really matter where we are these days, because everything's virtual anyway, right? So at Oasis Solutions, we focus on people and processes, because we believe that who you buy from in the marketplace is more important than what you buy. And who you're working with when you work with Oasis Solutions are CPAs, MBAs, former CFOs, controllers, and software developers. So we don't just know software, we know business. Our project managers have 350 plus years of combined expertise on our team. So I'm going to turn over the presentation today, right now, to Wayne Austin. Wayne, take it away.
Thank you, Jody. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So first, before we jump in, let's talk a bit about what are some of the values that the Sage Fixed Asset solution brings to your organization with regards to managing your fixed assets. This is a solution end-to-end for managing fixed assets through their entire life cycle. It also is going to help you maintain compliance with IRS tax laws and GAAP rules. And as you know, IRS law changes can certainly have some significant impact on your balance sheet. It integrates with most ERP systems. For today's webinar, where we are really going to be focusing on the Sage 100 integration. The solution is also going to help ensure that you're getting clean data in, which of course results in accurate reporting on the back end. The solution will also help you with identifying and eliminating overpayments of insurance and property taxes, for example. It's going to allow easy communication with outside auditing firms or CPA firms, even if you are, for example, using an outside firm for handling your taxes. You will be able to provide pretty robust reporting to these external firms you might be working with. The solution also includes Sarbanes-Oxley compliant reports, which is probably more important to publicly traded companies that may need security audits showing who has access to what. But just for a normal customer use, if you wanted the ability, for example, to look throughout the entire organization to say who has changed depreciation values on assets, who has changed depreciation methods over a particular period of time. So these reports are helpful in those type of scenarios as well. Now, first, as I go in, I'm going to be talking a bit about ghost assets. So let's clarify that a bit up front. So ghost assets are assets that are on your registry, and you're certainly not able to find them or identify where they are. They may have been discarded. No one's communicated that to the accounting department, or they've been taken out of service, or you may have a situation where things are actually walking away. So being able to properly identify ghost assets and remove them from your registry by doing a proper disposal, it's certainly going to minimize any type of impact you may have on overpayment of taxes, insurance, and certainly these could also impact productivity or even future budgets, because you certainly are not going to budget for replacing assets that, as far as you can see in the registry, you actually still have that should be in service. Now let's take a look at some of the components of the Sage Fixed Asset solution. Now, the planning module, this will handle all of the roll-up costs associated with projects or CIP. So in other words, before they become fixed assets. Certainly every organization does not have a need for this. Some of you may simply be buying new assets through your AP system, for example, and Sage 100 and place them directly in service. This particular module would be for people that may have some type of manufacturing environment, or you might be doing a renovation or leasehold improvement that's going to result in an asset being created after accumulating, multiple roll-up costs that you want to be able to report on, so you can easily track your spend against budget for multiple projects or multiple components of a project, and then easily place those items directly in service in the depreciation module. Now, if you notice on the graphics on the left, and I'll actually show you this when we go into the solution, it easily tracks what's spent or unspent of your budget, and you can also track your actual spend against two sets of numbers. So you can have an approved budget as well as a revised budget and report on your spend against both. The depreciation module, this is the heart of the solution. This includes 52 included depreciation methods. You can have up to a total of 20 depreciation books. So in other words, in a single asset, you could have 20 different depreciation methods in each individual depreciation book. The solution also includes an Audit Advisor, which would be a good way, for example, of letting you know if there's any potential issues you have in how you're handling your depreciation in the tax books, because it is enforcing the IRS tax rules. That's a tool that will actually help make your year-end process go much smoother for those of you that are doing tax depreciation. There are many standard reports included in the solution. It has pretty robust reporting for GAAP and for tax. Reports such as roll forward reports, depreciation expense, and certainly things like your journal entry report. The solution also has the ability to generate an actual fileable 4562, as well as the detail attachment that goes along with that, property tax report, sale of property or 4797 worksheet, including also the ability to run projection reports. So those of you that are involved, for example, in the budget and planning process would be able to run those projection reports looking at future year depreciation, so you can get an accurate picture of what your future year depreciations would look like. Now, the tracking module. This is the part of the solution that's actually going to help you identify and eliminate ghost assets. This is the tool that would be used for doing physical inventories of your fixed assets, where you can use either a handheld scanner or an Android app, where you can easily have someone who actually is using the tracking software push out an inventory list out to multiple devices, who can then go and scan those barcodes, update any information that's changed, and be able to send that data back to the system. Now, the outcome of doing that physical inventory, of course, is you'll be able to generate a reconciliation report that's actually going to identify what assets are missing. Now, since the tracking module does not have access to the depreciation book fields, those users are not going to be able to do disposals of those assets. So it would be up to the folks on the accounting side in the depreciation module who can then now use the information from that report and properly dispose of those assets to get them off the books. Now, in the standard version of the software, you're able to customize the reports by changing the sort order. It does have an optional custom reporting feature, which will include a fully integrated version of SAP Crystal Reports, where you can build any type of ad hoc report you decide to from scratch, include things like SQL formulas, expressions, and so on. But it also gives the ability to modify standard reports in the system, where you can add and remove custom reports. So you can add or remove different columns of data from a standard version of the reports that may not include something, let's say, like current net book value. So it really gives you pretty robust reporting capability and essentially gives you unlimited reporting capability. Let's talk a bit about how this integrates with the Sage 100 accounts payable and purchase order modules. In Sage 100, this is where most of the configuration will actually take place for the integration. You can even create a shortcut where you can launch the fixed asset module. Now, while doing an accounts payable or purchase order transaction, if you notice on the graphic on the right, if you look towards the bottom, you will actually see a description and below that asset template. What that's going to give you the ability to do is to integrate with any templates you created in the depreciation module, so that if you're creating assets from an AP transaction, in addition to the information such as the acquisition value, acquisition date, place, and service date that you may set while doing that AP transaction, you can also tell it to incorporate a template which you would create in the depreciation module, which would then apply things like your depreciation methods, property types, estimated lives for all of your depreciation books. So when placing an asset in service from an AP transaction and incorporating a template, the result is no further action needed once you place the asset in service. It has acquisition value, place in service date, all the other information, the appropriate GL account information from the AP transaction, but it also will populate that IRS property type, depreciation method, and estimated lives for all of your depreciation books. So it would simply be ready to start depreciation. Now, the integration as far as journal entry posting, Sage 100 is a bit unique in that once you run depreciation in the fixed asset depreciation module, you do not need to export or push out the journal entry. That information is immediately available to the Sage 100. Sage 100 will simply pull that journal information directly from the fixed asset module, thereby eliminating any export and import steps. And again, as I mentioned, all of this information, the majority of the configuration is actually done in the Sage 100 side, which I'm sure Jody and her team would be happy to help with any of you that might need that. If you take a look at these next few screenshots, it'll just give you a representation of what that looks like while doing that journal entry posting in the Sage 100 side. And one of the things you do want to ensure that does get configured correctly is when you set up the depreciation module, you want to ensure, and especially if you have multiple companies in Sage 100, that you do configure the depreciation company with all of the accurate GL account information, so that when you are doing your journal entry at month end, for example, you don't have any type of errors with your GL accounts. Now let's talk a bit about tax update and how that's handled in the solution. In the Sage Fixed Asset Solutions, we typically do 2 updates per year. Our tax update is normally done in January, typically the middle of the month. So any tax rule changes that were passed and laws by that December gets incorporated in that January release. Now, we also typically do a mid-year release somewhere around the September-October timeframe, which is normally just for feature enhancement, feature changes, and so on. But we do have the ability to incorporate any type of mid-year tax rule changes that may have gotten passed during the year. That is not a common occurrence. Last year was probably one of the exceptions where they did make some changes to the CARES Act that we actually incorporated in the release that came out in October of last year. This screen is showing you the tax updates that are included in the current release, and this information is also available in the software. So this will actually save you having to go out to the IRS website, for example. You can look up the information in the system so you can see what tax rule changes were incorporated. So in this case, there were some tax extenders, there were some changes to the Section 179 limits, and the future phase out for bonus depreciation, where starting in 2023, you're no longer going to be allowed, for example, to do 100% bonus. That gets decreased to 80%. And I will actually show you that information in the tables in the solution. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the solution. And I will actually start off in the planning module where we can talk about how it handles CIP. So this is the planning module in the Sage Fixed Asset Solution. This would handle any type of CIP that will result in assets that need to be created, where you can track your spend against both an original and a revised budget, get a quick overview of what's spent or unspent of the budget, for example. So if I look at my project settings, this is where I can populate a start and end date, some basic information about my project, but more importantly, what is my budget for that particular project? Now, you can certainly keep that original budget static because as you're going through the project, if anyone is doing any type of renovations or anything for that matter that involves building or construction equipment at this time, there's been some pretty significant increases in prices for building materials, for example. So this would be an example of where you might want to come in and create a revised budget and let this be the moving target and certainly keep your original budget static. That way you can report on your spend against either sets of numbers. If you look at my sample project here, the hierarchy I want you to think about is that each of these individual line items is what's actually going to become a fixed asset. So if you take a look at any of the individual line items, it will have its own budget, also has the ability to have a revised budget. You can customize these fields to capture any information about that asset, and these fields can be mapped to fields in the depreciation module so that when you place this in service, it is bringing over any of this information such as contractor info, who approved that budget category, and so on. These items, of course, can be capitalized or expensed. Now, if you look at the transactions below that, these are all of the roll-up costs I mentioned that might be coming from materials, labor, whatever the case may be. And this really could be for any type of project or any type of asset, from machine and equipment to a renovation to a software deployment, let's say. So you can use it for any type of project. This tool will now keep a running total of your entire spend against budget, and that will actually become your final acquisition value. So if you look at this particular line item, where my total spend is $1,169,000, you can see that is what's being measured against both my original budget for this item, where you can see I'm 69 grand over budget, as well as the revised budget I created for this item, where I'm 330K under budget. Now, if you look at the status column here, anything with an S like Sam has been placed in service. Anything with a C like Charlie it simply means I've told it spending is complete and is available to be placed in service. I do not have to wait until the entire project is complete. So if you look at the Asset Information tab on this item, I've simply told it here, spending is complete. This is where I can select and assign templates that can then apply things like your property type, depreciation methods, and estimated lives. And I can apply a place in service date that I want this to use when I do place it in service in the depreciation module. Now, to create assets, all I need to do is go to line items and select create assets, and it will collect anything that I flagged as spending is complete. Now, if I have multiple companies in my depreciation module, I can easily choose which company I want to send these assets to. I can select all and create all the assets at once in a single entity. If I have multiple companies and maybe this particular project is going to result in asset being created in different companies, I can certainly select the ones I go to company A, for example, here, and simply choose another company that I can simply use my shift key and send those assets to a different company. Now, I will show you how those assets will show up in the depreciation module when we go to that in just a few moments. Now, by the way, if you look at transactions, in some situations, you may have a large number of transactions that might be coming from your accounts payable system or from some other source. These can be imported from Excel. There is actually an import wizard as well. Now, of course, if you have multiple projects going, you'll certainly need to do some basic reporting on that. So I'm just going to actually highlight two of the reports. This is a consolidated summary report where I can look at multiple projects and see what my spend against either the original budget or the revised budget is for those projects on a single report. I can create different filters. If I just want to see over budget items or certain types of assets, I can easily do that as well. Let's take a quick look at that report. So if you take a look at this report, it is showing me the 4 projects I selected, my budget, my actual spend, and whether or not I'm over or under budget. And it's doing that for all 4 projects. So as you can see, most of my projects, it's showing that I'm below budget. One project is slightly over budget. Now, keep in mind, this is really just painting a very high-level summary picture and is not giving you the full details. If you do want to see the few details, you can either drill down and look at an individual project, all the details below, or you can simply run the report and tell it to show all details and subtotals, and it will expand out all the projects you selected. So now you can see the full picture of what's really going on. Now, if you take a look at my sample project 1 here, which showed that I'm $177,000 under budget, that's not really the full picture, because if you look at my actual spend versus what's budgeted, that's going to give you a better idea of the spending trend. Because if you notice here, I have quite a few items where my actual spend is $0 so far. If you take a look at my budget, what's budgeted for those items, some of these are $25,000, $8,000, $11,000, and so on. And there are several other items where spending is not yet complete that could result in going over budget. So certainly by looking at that spending trend, I'm going to be way over budget on this particular project. So keep in mind, the summary view is just painting the high-level picture. To really see what's going on, the detailed view will give you all the details. Another report that's quite common would be looking at transactions. One of the other common asks would be, hey, what have I spent, in the last 30 days or last 60 days? So I can simply choose a date range. Again, I can look at any filters based on what type of transactions I want to see, or I can look at everything, and you'll want to look at this in detail, and it'll simply show you all of your transactions, regardless of what line item or asset is going to be tied to, that occurred over the date range you selected. So it's going to give you just some basic information, your date posted, your transactions date, if you're using a reference number, vendor information, and so on, and what the actual spend was. it'll also give you a total for that spend for that date range that you're looking at. All the reports in the solution in all modules are exportable to multiple formats, so you can export these out to a PDF, Crystal Reports, Excel, CSV file, and so on. So everything has many export options. Now, in the case of custom reporting is available in all modules. When you have that custom reporting option, this is where I could actually create any type of ad hoc report from scratch, have it refresh the data when I open it, and where I can include things like graphs, SQL expression formulas, and literally build anything I want to. And this is available in all the modules. Now, let's take a moment and go over to the depreciation module so we can see what those assets look like when they come from the planning module. Now, you can have multiple companies in all the modules. So if you take a look at this sample company in my depreciation module, this is my asset list view where you can see all of the assets in this particular company, which is a total of 582 assets. This view can be customized, so I can choose what information I'm seeing, and if I include things like depreciation information, what book do I want that information from? Now, when I place anything in service coming from the planning module, it actually creates an entry in my groups list where you will see planning and the date and timestamp. And I can simply select that and it will show all the assets that were created at that time, be it 1 item or 100 items. If I look at the details of this, you will see my general information fields where I might identify things such as asset class, location, department, and so on. And certainly this is where I'll have my GL account information and description of the asset. Any fields I map from the planning module could be populating general information fields here. And all of these fields, by the way, are customizable. Now, in this particular case, since I actually told it to use a template, and here are my template lists, we'll talk about those a bit more. It included the acquisition date and place in service date from the planning module, the acquisition value, which was my total spend on this item in the planning module. But it also populated the IRS property type, depreciation methods, and estimated life for all of my depreciation books. So that is one of the benefits of the integration between the two. No duplicate entry. You can simply send things over to be placed in service. Now let's take a moment to look back at some of the settings in the depreciation module with how you might set up your company. The standard version of the software will support standard fiscal years. If any of you are using an alternate reporting period, such as a 445 or a 13 period, the Premier version or SQL Server version of the solution handles alternate reporting periods. Now, all versions of the solution will handle short years, and you can also specify book overrides, for example, such as how you want adjustments handled. Now, in the standard and Premier versions, you can have up to a total of 20 depreciation books. It will default to 7 depreciation books, so your federal tax, internal book for GAAP, state, AMT, ACE, and 2 custom books. You can rename the state book, AMT, or any of the additional books that you use, and you can certainly turn off any of the depreciation books that you are not using. Now let's go back into an asset detail so we can talk a bit more about some of those fields that I mentioned. Let's take a look at one of these computers. So let's talk a bit more about the book depreciation fields. So if you notice here on the bottom, these fields are in bold. So these are your required fields. So any assets you add, be it manual in the system or using an import, you do need to populate the IRS property type. So this is IRS defined. It does support personal property, real properties, automobiles, and so on. So you can have tangible or intangible assets, no problem, in the solution. That is separate, by the way, from your asset classes, which are user-defined, or if you're using a field for defining property tax category, those are user-defined fields. Other required field is certainly you need to have a place in service date, your acquisition value, depreciation methods, and estimated lives. It also does support ADS depreciation for any of you that might have a need for that. If you are doing bonus depreciation, maker's depreciation plus bonus, you also do need to identify that bonus percentage. Now, since all of those IRS rules are enforced, as I mentioned, it will only allow you to select the appropriate bonus percentage based on that asset's placed in service year. So if you go to Help, What's New, and then click on Learn More, as I shared with you, you're able to easily see what tax rule changes are included in the current release. You can also look up things like bonus depreciation table. And as you can see, those future year phase outs are included. I can also take a look at things like Section 179. So as you can see here for 2021, that limit is now 1,050,000, so 10K over 2020. So all of this is here as a quick reference, but those tools are built in. And it does enforce rules such as vehicle limits for those of you that might have vehicles. So if, for example, I placed a $50,000 vehicle in service using property type A in the solution, even if I selected 100% bonus, it's not going to actually try to take the entire 50,000 in bonus that you're placed in service, because for vehicles for 2021 and 2020, you can see the limits are here. It's going to limit me to what the IRS law actually specifies. So it's quite a useful tool. For those of you that might be doing GAAP, as I mentioned, there are 52 depreciation methods included. You can also create custom depreciation methods. You also have the ability to choose Do Not Depreciate as a depreciation method. Now, for those of you that might be doing bonus depreciations, there are some really good tools for helping you manage that. There is a 168 allowance switch. So if, for example, I've been placing assets in service for 2021 and I opted not to do bonus while I place them in service, let's say you're not making that decision, or your tax group is not making that decision until later in the year in Q3 or Q4, I can simply later in the year come in and turn on bonus depreciation at that point. Now, if you notice, it's actually showing all of the bonus percentages that are available ever. However, based on placed in service year, as I mentioned, those rules are enforced. If it were for assets placed in service in 2021, for example, you're only allowed 100% bonus or 50% bonus, and that would be the only bonus percentages you would actually be able to apply. For those of you doing tax depreciation, if mid-quarter becomes an issue, if you exceed 40% of the assets placed in service in Q4, I can simply come in and select which book I want to make the change for and change from half year to mid-quarter convention switch. It does have a mid-quarter test that will show you what your mid-quarter requirements are if you exceed that 40% placed in service in Q4. Okay. Let's take a look at another asset here. Now, the other tool that might be handy as well with regards to any of the books, there's also a bulk edit tool. So if you need to make mass changes to both depreciation method and estimated life, I can do this for any subset of assets, and I can change in multiple books at once, and I can change both depreciation method from anything to something else. Let's say in the case of the qualified improvement property that got passed in the CARES Act last year, you could change those assets to straight line half year, and those assets that you had to do depreciate at 39 years under that IRS rule change, you can now depreciate them at 15 years. So in one shot, I could change both their depreciation methods and their estimated lives, and I can decide if I want to make that change back to the placed in service date, or if I don't want to change the pass, I can make that change from the current depreciation through date going forward. So it does give me quite a bit of flexibility. The other tool I mentioned for tax, there's an Audit Advisor. I can run this for any fiscal year from my federal tax book. So let's take a look at a previous year where I have some issues in my sample data here. And this is going to identify anything that's a potential red flag that could certainly be a problem for you at year end. So in this particular sample data, it's showing me I've got a makers related issue. I've got a section 179 issue, and that looks like about it. So let's take a look at the section 179 issue. So you can see it's creating an exception here in red, and it's telling me that for that fiscal year I'm looking at back at 2018, my limit for section 179 bonus expense was 1 million. And to correct the problem, I need to actually reduce my 179 expense by more than 5 million. So I'm way over the limit. And it's also creating a group where any asset triggering that exception are going to show up in that group. So if I go back to my main asset list view, I can easily see that auto-created group. So let's take a look at the ones triggering the 179 issue. All of these assets are what's triggering that exception. If I look at them individually, you'll see for this asset, I'm taking $675,000 in 179 expense. And in the rest of them, I'm taking $700K. So individually, I'm below that limit. Combined, I'm well over the limit. So I can simply make the corrections recommended. And I can simply delete those auto-created groups and rerun my Audit Advisor. Everything looks good. I'm good to go. Now, the solution also, by the way, does have a period close function. So those of you that may want to close a period at the end of the fiscal year, or maybe for GAAP, you want to close this on a monthly basis, I can close the period independently for each of the books at different dates and times, which will essentially protect my data from people making changes that could impact anything to do with depreciation. If I am making changes at an individual asset level, at an individual book level even, I do have some options with how those changes are being reflected. So if, for example, I wanted to change a value, depreciation methods or lives, just like I had with the bulk edit tool, I can make that change from the current depreciation through date going forward if I don't want to change the past and have to do an amended return if it's a prior tax year, or do an amendment in Sage 100 because I've already posted that journal entry. But yes, you do have the option of going back to the place and service date. If you've done a prior adjustment of some sort on this asset and have a beginning date and begin accumulated depreciation populated, I can actually tell it to go back to that begin date. If I am using the period close function, that would become an option as well, where I can make the change back to that particular period close. So it does give you quite a bit of flexibility. The solution supports both full and partial disposals. Those are captured on the Transactions tab. There's a Notes tab. I include notes about anything I want to, and I can also link images, invoices, you name it. Basically, if I can scan it or take a picture of it, I can link it. It supports PDFs, JPEGs, GIF, bitmap files, and so on. And I can easily link a single image or invoice to multiple assets if I order multiple pieces of equipment on a single invoice and I want to link that in together. But let's take a quick look at some of the main reports that are going to be important. Certainly there's a standard report like a depreciation expense report where you can run this for any of your depreciation books, and you can actually run this for any subset of assets. You can also sort and subtotal these reports in any way you choose, and you can add or remove columns of data with the custom reporting feature that I mentioned. All the reports are exportable to multiple formats. So if you take a look at my depreciation expense report, it will show your prior depreciation through date, current depreciation through date, and your depreciation list run. Will give you your totals on the last page, less any disposals or transfers. Now, for those of you that are using Sage 100, as I mentioned, month end rolls around, I can simply run depreciation. So let's say I want to run depreciation for June. And if you notice in the asset details, it does show your prior depreciation through date, current through date, as well as your depreciation list run, current net book value calculations. So once you've run depreciation, if you look at the general ledger posting report, for you Sage 100 users, you don't have to run this report manually. You can certainly run this if you choose to, but with the integration configured, this data would actually be pulled by Sage 100 for your month-end processing in Sage 100. But certainly if you choose to run the report, everything here is exportable. You can certainly push it out to a CSV file, for example, to import into some other system. Couple of tax reports I wanted to touch on. It'll generate an actual fileable 4562. And if you're depreciated to your fiscal year end, in addition to the actual fileable 4562, it'll generate the detail attachment that goes along with this. So you'll have both pages as well as the detail attachment. Now, for those of you that are doing bonus depreciation, you'll also want to run the tax expense report. This is the report that you would use to reconcile that 4562. Now, as you do disposals through the year, let's take a look at what gets captured on the disposal report. You can actually run this for any period you choose. You can certainly run this looking at a month, a certain date range, multiple years, whatever the case may be. And this will capture any disposals during the date range that you're looking at. This will capture both full and partial disposals. So if you have a need for doing both, you can certainly do that. Let's look at how that is represented. So if you take a look at my system number, this is automatically assigned by the software. The asset ID field would be if you're using asset tags, as in with our tracking module, where you have barcodes that correspond to that when you're doing physical inventories. Description of what it is, of course, your in-service date and your disposal date. Under your acquired value field, I want you to really think of this as your disposal amount. So in the case of a full disposal, it's going to be the full acquisition value. If you look at my system number 416, you'll see I have 3 entries for that same truck. That's because I did 3 separate partial disposals on different dates. $10,000 on one occasion, $15,000 portion of the total on another occasion, $12,000 on another occasion. It's also going to capture your accumulated depreciation, your net proceeds and totals for everything, realized gain losses and totals for that. Now, certainly if you've been doing disposals, some of these may need to show up on your sale of property report. So let's take a look at the 4797 worksheet. I'm going to run this for all my assets, and I'm going to actually run this for a prior year where I had multiple sales. This will group everything into your 1245, 1250 property and so on, but this will also calculate your federal ordinary gain losses, which will be on page 2. So I'll just scroll down a bit so we can take a look at that. And this information here, which can simply be exported and send off to, let's say, if you're using an outside auditing firm or outside CPA firm. There are many other standard reports, as I mentioned, such as fixed asset summary or roll forward type reports. There are projection reports where you can look at future year depreciation. And as I mentioned, you can customize these reports by adding or removing columns of data, changing how they're sorted. All are available options. Let's actually take a look at this fixed asset summary report. This will capture your beginning cost, acquisitions, transfers in or out of the company, as well as disposals, your prior accumulated and total accumulated depreciation all in one report. And again, you can sort and subtotal this however you like. You can add or remove different columns of data. So your beginning cost, acquisitions, transfers, prior accumulated, total accumulated, and you will have your totals on the last page. The solution also includes a property tax report, which you could certainly run this on any subset of assets if you're in multiple property tax jurisdictions, for example. All right, let's take a quick peek at the tracking module for those of you that might be interested in doing physical inventories where you want to barcode your assets. That barcode is what corresponds to that asset tag number, as I mentioned, and that will actually be populated in the asset ID field that I mentioned, general information field. That field will actually take up to 50 characters, anything alphanumeric, so you can simply use any type of a numbering scheme you choose. The big difference with this module is that, let's take a look at one of these here, is that there's no access to book field. So as you can see, it has access to the general information field. So the users that are using the tracking module for doing physical inventories have no ability to impact the depreciation fields. Now, once they've completed a physical inventory where they're going to be able to use either an Android app or a traditional scanner, you will be able to send that data back. The person using this software will then be able to generate a reconciliation report. And I'm going to run the report for the last inventory I did. And this is a report that is now going to identify the outcome of that inventory. It will give you the asset tag number, what it is, and anything with a status code of N are assets not found. Anything found with no changes, a status of O. Anything found with changes, a status of C. But this is how you would identify those ghost assets, where the users and the depreciation module can then search based on that asset tag number and do a proper disposal to get them off the books. All right, I do want to ensure that I leave some time for Q&A, so I'm going to pause at this point so that we can see if there are any questions in the chat.
Solana, did you see any questions?
Let me see. I know there have been a couple that have come through, and I want to remind our attendees today that they can take some time right now to drop their questions in the Q&A. And if you have any difficulties accessing that, you can also drop them in the chat. And then if you have any issues with that, you can also use the raise hand function too. So any way that you want to contact us with any questions that you have, but let me address those that have already come through. So the first one that I've seen come through today is, do I need to get all the modules?
No, you do not. You can actually get the depreciation module only. So I'm just going back on my desktop. So as you can see, there's a depreciation module, tracking module, and planning module for handling CIP. You can simply choose to get depreciation only, or you can get depreciation and tracking, depreciation and planning. And if you are bundling the modules together, there are some cost savings involved, which once you let Jody know what you're interested in, we'd be happy to actually do a proper demonstration for your specific needs and identify what particular modules you might need for your particular organization.
Great, thank you, Wayne. And the next question I see is about pricing. So how is the pricing?
Wayne, shall I take that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, as Wayne just explained, Stage Fixed Assets is a modular system. So it is priced based on the particular modules that you choose, as well as the number of users that you require. Unlike Sage 100, which has concurrent user licenses, Stage Fixed Assets is named user license or assigned to a workstation. So you do need to have a user license for anybody who will be accessing the system. If you are interested in learning more about that or getting preliminary pricing for your organization, feel free to reach out to me directly. My contact information is on screen right now, and I'd be happy to go over that with you and get Wayne back on the line to answer specific questions and scope out a project for your business.
And Jody, actually, I want to mention one of the things, since they were asking about pricing. There's actually three different versions of the solution. There's a standard standalone version that would be for a single user, for example. There's a network version, multi-user. So if, for example, in your organization, you have 3 people that need to use it right now, and later on you have some growth and maybe need to add a couple of others users. So you would want the network multi-user version. Now, the differences between the standard network version and the Premier or SQL Server version is really capacity. So if your organization has 5,000 assets, 10,000 assets, 15,000 assets, you can use the standard network version. If you are a larger organization and you have 40, 50,000, 100,000 assets, you'd want to use the SQL Server version, which has a capacity of up to over 1 million assets per company. So it's quite scalable. And if you are an organization that, let's say you have 5,000 assets today, and you acquired a standard network version, but you're undergoing some growth. And in the next couple of years, you're up to 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 assets. There's no additional cost. So you can create as many companies as you want to and have whatever number of assets that version would support with no additional cost for you. So the pricing is based on named user. It is not based on number of companies or number of assets.
Thank you for clarifying that. I hadn't even thought about the different versions. We obviously do think about that when we're scoping out a fixed assets project for our clients. But I would say that the vast majority of our clients do tend to fall into the standard versions, be that a single user or network version for the standard. But then, as Wayne alluded to, there are some larger organizations that may have need for that SQL version. And when we discuss your particular situation, we could make recommendations for which platform is right for you. Falana, were there any other questions?
I think that is it. I can give you a few more minutes if we'd like, if anybody wants to take a second and drop one in the Q&A, or we can go ahead and wrap. It's entirely up to you all. Apologies.
Well, I think we can go ahead and give everybody back a few minutes in their day. Thank you so much, Wayne, for doing the presentation for us on safe fixed assets. Again, if you have any questions or are interested in learning more about these solutions as they may pertain and add value to your business, please reach out to me directly at my email address is jody@oasisky.com, or you can call the office or contact the consultant that you normally work with and just let them know that you want to talk about fixed assets. You will eventually get to me. So I hope I can be of help in the future. Thanks again, Wayne, and thanks, Falana, for organizing the webinar for us today.
My pleasure. Have a great rest of the day.